Good evening.
Woo!
A little bit of enthusiasm, that's good, okay. So, you said my name is Kojo. If you have been to one of these before, you have seen me, and if you haven't, hello, nice to meet you. I'm Kojo. So the title of my talk, AI K-pop Human building Soarpunk software teams. It sounds and feels very clickbaity, but the reality is, I guess the direct honest truth is, this is just the title of this talk because I'm old, and like this is just kind of like what my life has become, and so we'll go for it and we'll sort of see, what that kind of means. Some of the terminology there in the title is just sort of shorthand for other things, but we'll go forward and we'll see a little more detail as far as how this title gets sort of broken down and decomposed and what's being discussed. So who am I? I'm a software engineer. I work for a company called RevSys. We're a consulting firm based in Lawrence, Kansas. I work remotely. I'm also one of the organizers for DjangoCon US and PyCon US. DEFNA is the nonprofit that puts on DjangoCon US, and so I've been North American ambassador, which has meant like in the past I've gone and spoken to a bunch of different conferences and talked to people about that sort of thing. But I'm also someone who's changed careers, and so I have a bachelor's degree in accounting and an MBA, so a lot of my career has been in business before, and then I switched into software engineering about 10 years ago at this point. This is a profession. And so that's relevant to the way that I see certain things. I tend to sort of think about the business model behind things, and so that will become apparent in the talk. Again, so as I said, I used to be an accountant. I also lived in China for 2.5 years, and I started sort of seriously watching K-pop while I was living in China. And so, like I said, it informed some of my thinking on the matter. I joke with some of my friends in software engineering that I'm professionally trained in capitalism, because that's what a lot of accounting is. But that professional training informs the way I think about some of the business models, and also the time that I spent living in China changes some of my thinking. I would say that, first of all, sort of by show of hands, who is either familiar with K-pop or willing to admit that they're familiar with K-pop? Okay, that's the main one. Okay, so who has like a favorite group that they're familiar with? Some people are from the chat. People say, okay. And I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Julie?
Oh, Julie.
Julie, okay. And Vincent? Victor?
Yeah, Vincent.
Vincent, okay. So, favorite group?
They're
A favorite group?
they're older, but Infinite.
Oh, okay.
Twice.
Right, okay. So, does that mean anything to anybody else?
No, twice.
Okay. Anybody else want to just toss out the name of the K-pop group they know?
BTS.
Psy.
SNSD.
Oh, there we go. See, now what? Hold on now. I asked him, say my favorite group, and like two hands went up, and then suddenly everyone's like, oh, I did not SNSD and Psy and New Jeans. Okay, so guess what? SNSD, like a much older group, and New Jeans, new group with new drama. So, okay. So, I think of myself more as, and so for the people who are sort of familiar with K-pop and shy about admitting it, you will know that sometimes the K-pop fandom, and I'm going to make my break here, you'll know that the K-pop fandom can sometimes be overly energetic or overly passionate about things. So I think of myself really more as more of a K-pop industry observer as opposed to a K-pop fan per se. And like I said, we'll get into that more of a bit. Me being an industry observer is sort of shaped by the fact that I'm professionally trained in capitalism, and then I've sort of, from having watched the industry from 2005 on, I've seen how it has changed over time. And so, for instance, for things people have mentioned in the room, so when people mention different groups, there was mention of SNSD, which is Girls' Generation. One of the early seminal groups from what's called second generation K-pop, one of the early sort of massive groups. Then the Psy, who a lot of people had never heard of K-pop before until Gangnam Style became a massive hit. And then New Jeans, who is a newer group, who is currently dealing with certain legal issues with their company, which is HYBE, the company under that BTS is a part of. And so, so you've got these changes that have happened with these different groups over time, and the way that the industry interacts with the artists. And so that's some of where my talk is going to go. So this is sort of like the mathematical breakdown of my talk. So 8% K-pop, but really more about the K-pop industry. It's not going to be so much about, like, my favorite song lyrics or what have you. 80% K-pop the industry, another 10% AI. The 7.5 and 2.5, approximations, these are all very scientific approximations. But 7.5% demon hunting, then 2.5% Soarpunk. So like all these things are in the talk. This wasn't all just like clickbait words that I put together. This is all stuff that's here. And so we talked about K-pop groups. How many people have seen K-pop demon hunters? Okay, so people have seen it. According to I just saw a thing, today that it is like the most watched thing ever in the history of Netflix, and so it's super popular. It's being nominated for Grammys and all that sort of thing, and so for me it was just sort of, I guess the timing worked out well, that there were a lot of people who had never heard of K-pop before, but now they have heard of K-pop demon hunters. But then I have a separate demon hunting angle to share that I think will be useful to Python developers. We will see that as we go through the talks. So here's the summary. The way that we hire developers now, and the way that companies are looking to hire developers, is not very Soarpunk. Here I'm using Soarpunk as a stand-in term for sustainability. And so that's not happening now. You'll hear complaints about companies having trouble hiring devs, but the hiring process is not really a good one. Software is in general built in teams. This idols greater than rock stars thing is based on a lightning talk that I gave like in 2017, 2018. You will often see job listings where they say, oh, we need like a JavaScript rock star or a Python ninja or something like that. There are problems with that, and I think idols are what K-pop performers are called, whereas rock stars are sort of what we're familiar with here in the West. My position being idols are greater than rock stars. I'll explain that in more details as we go through the talk. And then there's this idea of cultural technology that I will introduce and discuss that, and that's sort of one of the underpinnings of the K-pop industry. I think that cultural technology might be able to better lead you to finding or developing software idols as opposed to rock stars and ninjas. So one problem that I've had with developing this talk is the fact that I'm old, and I have seen a lot of these things over the past like 20 or so years. So there's all this context in my head that makes sense to me, but I'm trying to make sure that I communicate that effectively to people who haven't been in my head for the last 20 years. So this is sort of a stripped down version of this talk, minimalist version of the talk. But the hope is that will leave extra time for questions, for people to ask questions that they have, especially if I leave it in context. So here's the sort of a problem statement, as I see it, is that right now, as I said, the way that we hire developers and the way that we build our software teams isn't really sustainable. We've all seen the Rockstar, the Ninja job listings, and there's also the issue that, and I think we're starting to see it now, where companies are only really wanting to hire senior developers. The jobs for more junior developers, more entry-level people don't seem to be there. Companies only want these sort of senior developers. There are a couple problems with this approach. It's sort of a simple encapsulated way of this, comparing it to music, is you're in a situation where you want to need a performer, and you're like, oh, well, I hope Beyonce or Taylor Swift are available to perform from my event. Well, one, no, they're not. And then two, like, those people are, only going to be available for like the Googles, the Microsofts of the world. They're not going to be showing up at your, little, 12-person venture capital-backed startup. And so but a lot of hiring practices are built around that desire, which just is the thing that doesn't work. So in addition to that, there's a couple more problems. One, this idea of like a senior developer. Like who can tell me what a senior developer is?
Autonomous. You give them a problem and he solves it without guidance.
So someone you can just sort of throw at a problem and they just fix it.
A product.
So almost like a wizard. And so, oftentimes this idea of like, how do you know if someone is a senior developer? Or how do you know if you are a senior developer? And how does one go from not senior developer to senior developer? It's a very vague term, but again, it's as was pointed out, it's this hope that this person will show up and just solve the problems I have. I haven't really defined the problems I have, but I just need someone who can show up and solve them, which doesn't seem like the best way to do things. Also, the terms that we see, often these rock stars and ninjas, those are almost always descriptors for individuals, and for like a sort of a high-performing individual. And the reality is, almost any substantial software is built in teams. Like the software that runs on our phones, that runs on our desktops, on our laptops, the software that that runs the machinery around us. That's not built by one really smart person, typing really fast and drinking a lot of Mountain Dew. That software is built in teams. That's why we have things like Git and GitHub, and it's why Microsoft paid billions of dollars to acquire GitHub. Not Git, but GitHub, the hub where people come together to collaborate on software, because software is built in teams. And so that's sort of what I see as some of the problems as far as how hiring is happening and how software teams are built. So again, Soarpunk here being sort of a stand-in for sustainability. And then there are a few things here that come into play from my business background. So you have companies are having trouble finding developers because they're looking for these senior developers, but they don't really know what senior is other than person who just shows up and solves my problem. But if you don't know what senior is, like, how do you know if this person is going to be able to be that senior developer? Because you don't really know what you're looking for. You're just kind of hoping. It's like magical thinking. So if you're a business that relies on software developers, you run into what's called the going concern principle. So this comes from my accounting background. Started my career as an auditor. This idea of a going concern principle is basically concern is the old term for a business. So the going concern principle is there something with this business that could cause it to cease to exist in the near future? Usually this is done during financial audits, and it's the near future usually being maybe in the next 12 months, the next business year. And so if you are in a situation where you don't have a good way to find new developers or to evaluate the type of developers you need, you start to run into this sort of going concern principle, because it's like, okay, well, we don't really know what we're looking for. We're just sort of hoping. And then again, you've got companies that they complain that they can't find developers. They're looking for senior developers that don't know what that is. This last line, I'm trying to keep the language, where people are all adults, try to keep language PG. But software, there's a term, brilliant asshole, that often gets used, and people will often sort of try to, this guy's a terrible person, but they're really good at what they do. But the reality is, again, most software isn't built by these singular brilliant assholes. It's built by teams of people. And if you don't have folks who can work in teams, you're not going to have much. You're not going to have much in the way of open source software or commercial software. That's just sort of the reality of how complex software is built. So, beyond just sort of complaining, I propose a potential solution. And so the approach that the potential solution that I'm putting forth focuses on two things. One, actually defining the skills that you want in these developers that you're hiring. Okay, like, what are you looking for? What do you want this person to be able to do? What do you need them to be able to do? And then once you define the skills that you're looking for, it makes it easier for you to know where to look for those people, or how to evaluate people who come to you. And then the second point is having some sort of tool in place to help improve or enhance the skills of the people that you have on your team currently, or the people that you add to your team. So that's sort of the potential solution. And a summarized term for this is what's known as cultural technology. And so cultural technology currently it gets used a lot in the K-pop industry, but it predates the K-pop industry by a number of decades, maybe going back to the 1960s or earlier. It is in many ways a term for what we sometimes call soft power. The way that certain, for instance, American television and Hollywood is a form of cultural technology. If you are from outside the U.S. And so you all have seen American television and American movies in countries that weren't America, yes. And so when I lived in China, I watched English language TV from Hong Kong, and the majority of that English language content was from the U.S. There was some from the UK, some from Australia. But this is a form of cultural technology, where it's sort of a soft power method of projecting information about your culture to other places. And so in this specific case, when we're talking about K-pop, focusing on K-pop here, the term cultural technology is used now in the K-pop industry, referring to the 4 pillars or 4 steps that are used in the K-pop industry to train the idols or train the performers. I'm going to be focusing on the first 2 of these, which are casting and training. But again, I think these can be useful in the software industry as well. So first, just a little bit of a primer about K-pop is, and I got to do it because I didn't know who was going to be familiar with K-pop or who wouldn't know or that sort of thing. Or I knew there would be more people who knew about K-pop than would be willing to admit it. I knew that would be a thing. But just as a brief primer, you've got the big 4 K-pop companies, and all these companies are publicly traded. And so the numbers here are their market capitalizations as of like December 2025 or January 2026. So you can see it's a lot of money. It is easy to think about K-pop in terms of, oh, it's just cute young Asian kids dancing around and smiling. Like, yeah, that's kind of part of it, but also billions upon billions of dollars. And so for a long time, SM Entertainment was the largest of the big 3. SM Entertainment, each of these sort of represents a person's name. Lee Soo-man is the founder of SM Entertainment, and also the person who has sort of most advanced this cultural technology idea over the past 2 decades or so. JYP, Jin Young Park is the founder of JYP Entertainment. Yang Goon is a stage name of a man, the man who founded YG Entertainment. The outlier here is HYBE. You notice, they are 9.4 billion as opposed to, they're more than 4 times the size of the others. HYBE used to be called Big Hit. This is the company behind BTS, and they effectively sort of caught lightning in a bottle. BTS became like spectacularly popular all over the globe, and dramatically boosted their market capitalization. And then that allowed HYBE to acquire a number of different companies. So one of them was mentioned New Jeans. New Jeans was under a company called Adore, but Adore got acquired by HYBE. HYBE, let's see. There's been a lot of legal drama. HYBE at some point acquired a large percentage of SM Entertainment, and then I think they sold it to somebody else. But this is here to point out that, one, these are the companies that are using cultural technology to produce the groups that you heard of. So SNSD / Girls' Generation, Twice, Psy to a certain extent, New Jeans, all these groups that you've heard about, BTS. These are the companies that are using cultural technology to produce these groups and to bring these groups into existence. So what do we have here? What do we have in these groups? What are these groups? What do these groups look like? How are they structured? So a basic primer, again, not knowing who's sort of familiar with K-pop. One of the things about K-pop groups is that there are defined roles of the groups. And so in the the 3 main roles are a vocal, a rapper, and a dancer. A vocal, what we would call the singer in the West. And you will have a main vocal, which is what we would call a lead singer. So if we use the example of, say, Destiny's Child, or something like that, Beyonce would be the main vocal, Kelly and Michelle would be the lead vocals. And sometimes you've got other groups. We don't have as many groups that are as large in the West, but SNSD, a group was mentioned, is a group that now has 8 members, used to have 9 members. BTS has 7 members. So you've got lots of different members. So you will have, say, maybe some groups might have one or two main vocals, and then 1 or 2 lead vocals, and then the others will be called sometimes a sub-vocal or just a vocal. So, usually people, the main vocals are the ones who do like the more difficult singing, and then the lead vocals sort of support them and things of that nature. And the same with rappers. You've got a main rapper, a lead rapper, and then a sub or unmodified rapper, and then the same with the dancers, and you've got a wide range of people here. This visual line can contain a lot of different things. Sometimes the visual is just the pretty person. And it's like, okay, well, we have this group of people, but you are really good looking. And so I need you to be here and be good looking with these other people that I have. And maybe you are not the best at dancing or singing, but we can teach you enough dancing and singing, but really, we kind of need you to just be here and be the good looking one with these people. And so that will sometimes lead you to this center position, which means, okay, we've got these 7 people together. You're the good looking one. We're going to put you in the literal physical center, so that when people look at the picture of us, they see, you know, of our group, we see the good looking one right there in the center. You also sometimes have what's called a visual lead. This is sometimes the person who is sort of similar to the FOTG, the face of the group. The visual lead is maybe the person who is on television shows. In the context of the Korean entertainment industry, there are a lot of what are called variety shows. And so we have like talk shows here in the US. This is sort of a different thing. So there a lot of the entertainment happens in these different variety shows that are sort of a combination of game shows and talk shows, and where the idols go on and they're, you know, funny and they're engaging and, you know, and that sort of thing. And so some people are just sort of better at that. And so regardless of where you are, how well you sing or rap or dance, or how pretty you are, some people just have really good comedic timing and are very charismatic. And so that person might be the visual lead. That also might lead them to be the face of the group. And so there's a lot of variation here. You also have situations where there are people who might have multiple roles. So people who mentioned BTS. So BTS, they have a member, the Jungkook, who is the main vocal, but he is the lead dancer. And then another member, Jimin, is the lead vocal and the lead dancer. And there's J-Hope, who is the main dancer and sub-rapper. And their leader, RM, is the main rapper and basically just a rapper. But then also, most groups have a leader. There's a designated leader. Because Korean culture is sort of hierarchically based. For a long time, the leader was just the oldest member, but then sometimes that has changed over time, where now sometimes the leader is just the person who maybe has the best leadership qualities or is most charismatic. We're also starting to see a new trend here over the past maybe 5 or so years, where you will have unit leaders. So you'll have a group where, you know, there might be like a vocal leader, and then a rap leader and a dance leader. So, you know, so that's the member who is in charge of making sure the choreography is performed properly, that sort of thing. The main point of me sort of going through this and describing this is these roles are defined. And companies know what they want, and they know what they're looking for. And so there's also a term called self-producing idols that I'll get into in a little more detail a little bit later. And so if you know what you're looking for, then you have to go through the process of, okay, well, how do I find these people? And this is where the casting starts. So you start with what you're looking for. You've got these roles defined in the groups, and then you sort of decide, okay, how do I want this group to be built? What sort of group composition do I want? Someone mentioned twice. One of the things that people have talked about with the group twice is that, you know, some people say, oh, it's just a group of all visuals. They just got a bunch of pretty people. And maybe they can sing all right, they can sing well enough, but, you know, mostly they're pretty. The actual meaning of that name twice, they're from the company JYP, and his description of them is, you'll fall in love with them twice, once through your eyes and once through your ears. And that's where that group's name comes from. And so the way that idols are cast, you know, companies sort of, they know what they want and then they go looking for it. So these different companies will have these global casting calls all over the world. You know, a lot in Korea where groups are based, but also in other parts of Asia and around the world. Different audition events, but then sometimes they will also go to vocal and singing schools, because if they know we need a main dancer or a main vocal, they will go to dance schools or to singing schools and try to find the best performers there, and then recruit other people, and then train them further once they get into the company. But again, they're starting with what it is they're looking for. There are also times where people are cast just based on their looks. So again, you have the BTS, people familiar with BTS, their oldest member, Jin, was cast just for his looks. They're like, oh, this guy's good looking. I need him to stand with these 6 other guys. You know, a couple of these guys are good looking, but you know, this guy is good looking in a certain way. I need him to stand with my other 6 guys so he can be the good looking one. And so there are a lot of different ways that people are cast. But one of the key things about that is once we know what we're looking for and then we go to find these people, they don't just show up and just start doing their thing. Once they get into the company, we continue to train them. And so this is sort of that second part of cultural technology, this training process. So despite their initial skills, every company has training programs in place to help their idols, or really their potential idols, become as good as they can be. Because once these people are recruited into the company, they're not idols, they're trainees. And so you're not technically an idol until your group has debuted. Excuse me. And so all of these trainees go through a certain training period. Being cast doesn't mean you've made it. Training times vary, but there's been a range. The ranges that I've heard of, the longest training time I've ever heard of is 15 years. From the time like someone entered the company until the time they actually debuted. That was like one guy, a guy named G-Soul from JYP. Before that, there were a couple of other JYP artists who were trained for like 6 to 7 years before they debuted. If anybody's familiar with the Wonder Girls or 2AM, a couple of members from those groups, they trained for about 7 years before they debuted. Some idols, a few idols I've heard of have trained for like 6 months because they kind of showed up like ready to go. But again, the idea is you got a range of training time. And then you've got people put together in different groups, and then decisions are made as far as, okay, well, what do we want the composition of this group to be? Do we want this group to be focused around their dancing abilities? Do we want them to be focused primarily around their vocal and singing abilities? Do we want them to be rappers? Do we want to blend? But again, the training is based around what role that person is supposed to have in the group. So when we talked before about the vocals, of course the vocals are going to get vocal training, singing training. Rappers are sometimes spoken because of the ability to speak English, because there's a certain amount of English that goes into various rap lyrics. Dancers, the same thing, their ability to dance, to learn choreography. But if we go back to this idea of these visual roles, a lot of idols will get acting training. Because for the people who are going to be the visual leads or the faces of the group, one of the ways that they might do that is by being in commercials. What are called CFs in Korea, but they're just commercials, advertisements, endorsements. And so those people might get acting training, or those people might end up playing roles in other music videos. And so there's acting training there, or they may end up being in television shows or in movies. And so there's acting training, there's language training, because while these are K-pop groups, they're based in Korea, their other big markets tend to be Japan, and then to a certain extent mainland China, and that has changed, in Taiwan. And so they're getting trained to speak Japanese and to speak Mandarin and to speak English so they can reach international fans. But the idea is, went too far. But again, one of the key points here is that this training continues to go on for the idols. They don't just find pretty kids and just sort of throw them out in the world. In addition to acting training, there's a certain amount of public speaking training that happens. So if you're the leader of a group, part of your job as the leader of a group is to be the spokesperson for the group. And so when your group is performing somewhere, the person who addresses the audience is almost always the leader. That's kind of their job. You end up sort of being in front of the group a lot. And so there's public speaking training, things of that nature that go on. But and it can also include being trained in songwriting or music production. And so all of these companies have these training facilities to make sure that the idols that they've added to their teams are appropriately trained. So we talked about casting and training for idols. So what would this look like for developers? So this is where it gets a little nebulous because we don't have quite as well-defined terms, but also there are a lot of different things people can do with software. Again, I think the main problem is this. most companies don't put time into thinking about what they want specifically. They just sort of want a senior developer, i.e. someone who can just kind of show up and fix my problem for me magically. They haven't really thought about what it is they want. And so when you start with what you're looking for, it's easier to find what you want. If you actually know what you want, defining the roles that you want in a group or that group composition, that determines sort of who you're looking for or where you're looking for them. So what are some of the things that you need to think about if you're trying to cast the developers that you need? This text is way too small. Julie, can you read that? Okay. I'm a very simple person. I try to make slides that are just basic, white background, black text. Hopefully it's visible. But so here are some of the questions that I think can be asked as far as, okay, if you're trying to find developers, like what are the things that you need when you are in your organization? Do you need, are you doing Pydantic and Fast API? Is type hinting? And again, I focus this on Python because it's PyHouston. There are plenty of places where you can write Python, you don't need to do type hinting, but some places want that and do that, and they think it's valuable. So do you want people who are in the habit of doing that? How important is testing? Some places just don't do any sort of testing at all. I know it's frightening, but it's true. That's just this is just the world we live in. But then some people do manual testing. Some people do automated testing. Have full CI/CD pipelines. But is that important to you? Do you want people with that set of skills? How important is documentation to you? Are you writing documentation that's just going to be used internally by your own development team, or are you trying to create high-quality documentation so that other people can use your software? Like if you're creating something that you want to be open sourced, so that you want other developers to use it, how important is that documentation to you? Who are you writing it for? How important are efficient database queries to what you build? Now, so I work mostly in Django, and so I'm a web developer. We build web applications. The efficiency of database queries is very important to what we do, but there are plenty of things you can do with Python that might not ever hit the database. So maybe you don't care about that, or maybe it's very important to you. But then also, like, what level of expertise in optimizing database queries do you need based on what you are doing in your company? How many different tech stacks are you combining? Are you in a place that's like just all Python, or mostly Python and Django, or are you doing Python and JavaScript, or are you mixing some PHP and some Rust and some Go in there? Are you using Erlang and Haskell? Are you mixing Erlang and Haskell with other stuff? Do you need to improve your DevOps flow? Are you using Docker and Kubernetes and things of that nature? Or you have some of these other more specific libraries like Pandas and NumPy and SciPy, or other more specialized libraries. You can spend, I've been a professional developer for 10 years now. I've always been interested in Pandas and NumPy and SciPy, never needed to use them. And I know plenty of people who don't, and don't never had to use them either. I also know plenty of people who do more data sciencey stuff and have never had to do anything web related. So like Django is all about HTTP requests and responses, but there are plenty of people who have used Python for decades and have never had to do any of that. And so these are, I think, some of the basic questions to think about as far as, okay, if you're trying to cast a developer, what is it you're looking for? And then I think that gives you some direction as far as what you want to do. And so, I didn't even include any of the front end or back end split that happens like in web development, but that's sort of specific to web development. The things running on AS400 mainframes and all sorts of stuff. So, what are these different things that that you are doing? But these are the kinds of questions that you can ask people when you're interviewing them, or if you're going through an interview process and you're going to do pair programming with them. These are the sorts of things that you can talk about and discuss their expertise in these areas. But if you haven't even thought about these questions, then it's hard to sort of determine who is or is not a good candidate. So this next bit has sometimes been contentious in talking to software developers. I've especially heard the phrase like, well, I don't want to have to hold anybody's hand. And so that's, when we talk about what is a senior developer, if you've got a group that sort of considers themselves to be senior developers, and you're looking for another person to join the team, they often want another senior developer because that means they won't have to hold that person's hand, i.e. like, this person won't be bothering me with anything. They can just sort of be, as was pointed out before, they'll be autonomous. and they can just sort of go off and just sort of do things on their own. Which is, and if you're in a small organization, and especially when maybe one that's backed by VC funding, and you're trying to make a thing happen fast, that makes a certain amount of sense. But the reality is, that's not most software teams. Like the majority of software teams aren't that way. Here in Houston, we have a situation where Austin is thought of as like sort of the tech center of Texas, the tech city. But the reality is there are way more developers in Houston than there are in Austin. It's just Austin has more of a standalone tech industry, whereas here in Houston, we've got a lot more developers, but they're embedded in the oil and gas industry, they're at the med center, they're in the engineering industries around those. So we've got a lot more developers. Again, most of those developers aren't in these sort of small VC-backed teams. So again, you have to start with defining what you're looking for, and then that determines what sort of training you might need to improve the skills of your people. Well, what skills do you want them to have? What skills do you need them to have going forward? And that can help sort of determine what sort of training facilities you might need for some of these developers who are in place. And so some of these developer training resources, right now in 2026, we are in almost sort of like the golden age of learning how to code or improving one's skills as a developer. There's so many different resources that are available for no money or for very little money, especially a very small amount of money compared to what you would be paying a developer. And so, with the Coursera, Udemy just got bought, OpenCourseWare, MIT's courses are online. Python specifically, real Python or Rodney Learning, all of these can, for $200 to $300 a year, or where you can get team plans to give your development team access to this massive library of books that they literally never ever be able to get all the way through. Pragmatic programmer, attending conferences. I'm a little bit biased as a conference organizer, but I think attending conferences is not only a great way to learn because there are technical talks being presented by a wide range of people, but it also gives you an opportunity to talk to other developers and say, okay, well, hey, like, what are you all doing? Like, if you go to PyTexas, if you go to PyCon US, or PyCon US, DjangoCon US, PyCon Africa, DjangoCon Africa, EuroPython, DjangoCon Europe, PyCon Australia, DjangoCon Australia. If you go to any of those, you can talk to other developers, other Python developers, and say, hey, well, what are you all doing with Python, and how are you all doing it? How are you solving this problem? And so there are a lot of ways, a lot of value that comes from that. The current senior developers that you have here, these are people who should be able to help the rest of your team level up. And then also, LLMs and the so-called the AI tools that are useful as far as helping to assist people with their understanding of a code base or sort of complex issues. So I've often heard, the idea of, well, I don't want to have to hold anybody's hand. We just want somebody to just show up and we just sort of do stuff on their own. And then two, well, I'm not a teacher, I'm at a university. Well, all these materials are there and pre-existing. You don't have to become a college professor. You can just sort of point somebody at particular resources. And so now, my spicy hot take is related to that. I had senior developer in quotes before. And my contention is this, like, if you think of yourself as a senior developer, but you don't really have the ability to help another developer become more senior, you might not be as senior as you thought you were. I said what I said. That's just what that is. And also, like, if you're not willing to try to help other people on your team advance their skills and become more senior, you might want to rethink that, because, and if you're someone who's running an organization and you don't have an engineering culture that promotes members of your team helping each other improve their skills and become more senior, become more experienced, you might be heading towards the going concern principle. You might be running into a situation of, okay, well, this isn't going to work. Or you might have developers who just leave to go somewhere else, someplace else where they can grow and where they can expand their skills. So that's my hot take. Is go back to K-pop. You were promised Demon Hunters. I did. I said something about Demon Hunters. Again, the K-pop Demon Hunter thing just sort of worked kind of in my favor. Here, in the title of this talk, I used demon hunting as sort of a metaphor for teamwork or in building teamwork. And specifically, some visual aids here. So I play a game called Pathfinder. If anyone has heard of that, or so you might not have heard of Pathfinder, but you've all heard of Dungeons and Dragons, yes? Yeah. Pathfinder, very similar. It was initially based on Dungeons and Dragons, and so, but it's a sort of team-based game. I gave a talk in 2015 about building your software development teams in the ways that you would build a D&D or a Pathfinder party. You have different roles on the team. And if you like the same thing but you like space, there's a Starfighter, which is Pathfinder in the future in space. So, you know, if you like that sort of thing. There are 4 sort of basic classes in Pathfinder. There's a fighter, think like a knight in armor with a big sword. A wizard, think Gandalf or what have you from Lord of the Rings. A rogue, who is somebody who is very skilled at solving puzzles, disarming traps, sneaking around, that sort of thing. And then a cleric, who is someone who has magic, but that magic is better at healing people and protecting their team. That's sort of the standard 4-person party build. If you try to go into a scenario with just like 4 fighters, or 4 wizards, or 4 clerics, they're almost never going to make it. Because, yes, your fighter is really good at hitting things with its sword, and that's all cool, until like something flies through the air, and is breathing fire on them, and now, oh, well, my sword won't reach it, and now, or until like a giant troll shows up, and it's like, well, no, we can't kill it fast enough. If only we had somebody who could like shoot a fireball at it, or somebody who could heal us after we're hurt, or somebody who could, sneak behind it and stab it. So it's a whole separate talk, but the idea being you need different components to your team. You need different skill sets on every team. Just like in a K-pop group and an idol group, you've got dancers and rappers and vocals. In a software team, you've got back-end developers and feature developers. You have front-end developers. You have QA people. You have you have QA people. You have documentation. You need all these different roles to make your team work. The demon hunting thing specifically is. So I came back to playing Pathfinder, I guess about 3 years ago now, and almost every character that I've built has kind of been built to fight demons and to dead things, and so it was kind of weird to me that I was late to the K-pop demon hunter thing. So I am, in my circle of friends, I am both the K-pop guy, because I've been, one of the few people I know who's been listening to K-pop for 20 years, and then also I spent the last 2 or 3 years literally hunting demons in Pathfinder. And then there's a movie called K-pop Demon Hunter that I had never heard of. And people are like, well, Kojo, have you seen this? I'm like, what? I am the K-pop Demon Hunter. What are you talking about? Why are you talking to me about this? But that's sort of why I have that in the title. There are opportunities to build your teamwork. Again, software, most significant software is built in teams. It's not built by some lone genius somewhere. Software is built in teams, and so there are things that you can do to practice your teamwork. Demon hunting is one of those things. There are abilities to, no one cares too much about the details of Pathfinder per se, but you can use some of these things to practice team building. So you can play games like Pathfinder where it's like, okay, well, demon shows up. Person who's good at hitting things with a sword goes to fight the demon, but demons have a certain weakness to a metal called cold iron. Well, I have my wizard can turn the fighter's sword into a cold iron sword, so that it does more damage when it hits it. And then if the fighter gets hurt, the cleric can heal them, so on and so forth. There are different things that you can do to practice your team building. Pathfinder is one of them. The jersey that I'm wearing, this is a shirt for a team called the Houston Outlaws from a game called Overwatch. Esports is kind of beyond the scope of this talk, but esports is essentially competitive video games. In this game, you play in teams of either 5v5 or sometimes 6v6, and so you have to work with your team. You have different roles on the team. You have tanks, you have damage dealers, you have supports, and you have to work with your team to be able to be successful in what you're doing in the game. You can't just have all damage dealers or all tanks or all supports. You need, you need a mix, and then that mix has to be able to work together. So, and again, there are a lot of opportunities to branch team building. Sort of the good news is, all these things that I mentioned are all very much nerd adjacent. And so, if you're a software developer, you're a nerd. Sorry, that's just who it is. It is you, it is me. We are all the nerds together. That's just how it goes. But nerds also play Pathfinder and Starfighter. Nerds also play video games. And so, you've got these other sort of what can be fun team building exercises to help your team learn to work better together as teams and see some of those results immediately, like in a video game or with a roll of dice and saying, haha, I got that thing, as opposed to like waiting for software to ship. And so this is kind of sort of where the Demon Hunter angle comes in. The fact that you're needing to build teams that each have different ways of contributing to the team's overall success. And again, so Starfinder, like Pathfinder in this space, I am currently playing a character, and I won't go into too much detail about this, but I'm currently playing a character class called a Technomancer, which is a combination of a character that uses technology and magic together. There are 4 different subclasses, each is a programming language. So one is called DPS++. You might have heard of a programming language with a similar name. There's a programming language called Fortran. You might have heard of that language with a similar name. There's a programming language called Viper. And Viper is designed to have you with readability in mind, and so on and so forth. So I am playing a Technomancer who uses Viper. Okay, I'm playing a Python programmer in space. And he's able to do a bunch of different stuff with Python. Won't go into the details, but again, there are interesting things that you can do to sort of to work on the teamwork and sort of see the values in the different roles. So I know that a lot of what I've said here thus far has been about, well, companies can and should do this, and they should be providing this sort of thing. And it's like, okay, cool story, Kojo, but I need a job, or I don't have a job, or like I might not be in a position to make my company do all this fancy stuff that you said. And even if I got you to come to my company to talk to my boss, they're not going to listen to you. Who are you? And so, in an effort to try to provide a little more direct value to you, I mentioned before about the concept of self-producing idols. And so, we talked about the different roles, the vocals, the dancers, the rappers, the companies providing training for them. What is happening here more recently is there's this idea of what are called self-producing idols. What has happened in the past is the companies have people who wrote the songs, did the choreography, sort of did everything, and then the idols just sort of showed up and did what they were told. But now you've got more and more idols who are writing their own songs, producing their own songs, who are more involved in this process. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here. There were different. No one mentioned any self-producing groups, but there are a few groups like Stray Kids or 17 or Idol, a group that we call IDLE, Idol, who are known for being much more involved in the writing and the production of their own music. And so my thinking is that you too can also be a self-producing idol. If you're at a company where your company isn't sort of willing to do these sorts of things and invest in your training, you can do some of this stuff on your own instead of just relying entirely on the company yourself. So what would that look like? So I've said all these things. Maybe it sounds like it might be good, but like, what can you do with that? Or what can you take home with that? And the idea being that you can be a self-producing idol. So about picking what is the role that you want? What do you want to do as a software developer? Do you want to be more focused on back end? There was that list of questions you went through, and that's just sort of a starting point. And there are a lot of different ways to do software. But what do you want to do as a software developer? What skills do you want to improve on? Where do you want to take your career? And then based on that, pick your training resources. Again, most of the training resources that I pointed out earlier are available to individuals. I have subscriptions to a bunch of those. A few of them I got rid of just because there was too much stuff. Like I didn't have time to actually use all those resources. So based on you deciding what you want to do, deciding your role, you can catch yourself, find a training resource to help you advance those skills. You can also use an LLM to sort of help you. I'm kind of trying that on myself now. I'm sort of experimenting with myself because that's how science works. Maybe it's not how science is supposed to work. And so this is how I'm sort of trying to make myself a self-producing idol. So what's the role I picked for myself? I'm calling it Confident JavaScript Reader. So I work in Python and Django, but if you're doing web development, at some point JavaScript's going to come up. And so I've been in situations where I'm having to interact with JavaScript a little bit more. I never really have to be a JavaScript expert, but I'm like, okay, I've seen enough of this now. I'm like, yeah, I need to be more comfortable at least reading this JavaScript. Like if I'm looking at templates, like React templates and things of that nature, I'm familiar enough with the templates to know like what's going on here and how things go in and out of web-based templates, but reading this JavaScript, I'm not super comfortable with. So I need to be more confident, more comfortable with reading JavaScript. For training materials, there's a book called Eloquent JavaScript 4th edition that I've started to use. And when we look at these roles, we talked before about, there'd be like a main vocal and a lead vocal and a sub vocal. I'm going to be a sub vocal here as far as JavaScript goes. Like on my team, we have like a main vocal. We have two main vocals as far as JavaScript goes. So I don't even need to be a lead vocal. I might need to turn into a lead vocal at some point, but initially I'm planning to just be just like a vocal with JavaScript. And I'm going to use Eloquent JavaScript for that. I have a study schedule that I came up with when I was changing careers. So again, I'm someone who changed careers. I call it sort of the 3-2-1 schedule or the 10-15-30 schedule. And I sort of use that with Claude to sort of to work out a schedule to help me go through this sort of 10-15-30 schedule. This is what I did when I was in my final accounting job, and I was trying to teach myself Python and improve my skills. So I would spend 10 minutes in the morning, like before I went to work, looking at whatever training material it was I was going through, whether it was a course or a book, whatever. So 10 minutes, sort of going through that. And then before I left for work, I'd write some notes to myself so that I would know where to pick up at lunch. And then at lunch, I'd spend 15 minutes, another 15 minutes sort of going through that material, but I knew exactly where to pick up. And then when I was done with that, I'd leave myself some notes for when I got home that evening. And then when I got home that night, I got more time, and so I'd have 30 minutes just to spend on continuing my progress. But again, having these notes to pick up on, so I'm not having to spend time figuring things out. And then when I finish those 30 minutes at night, leave myself some notes for tomorrow morning. And then the next morning, 10, 15, 30, the next day, and so just doing that every day, it allows me. It allows me to make progress. Two, the gaps between those times, like from the morning to lunch to the evening, your unconscious mind is sort of working on some of the problems or some of those things that you encountered anyway. And so this is the schedule that I've used to help me in my career change. And then I sort of had this book, Eloquent JavaScript, is I got a PDF, bought a PDF for it, but it's also available online for free. So the point of Claude at it, and was like, hey, build me, here's the schedule I want to use, build me out, like, sort of a checklist to go through this, for a week of this. And so I'm going to get started with that tomorrow. So if you see me next month, ask me how it's going, and we'll see how much JavaScript I've learned and how far I am on the way to being a competent JavaScript reader. And so this is what I'm planning to do to try to make myself self-producing idol. And I also point out where I work, I've got plenty of people who are more than happy to help me, but it felt a little disingenuous. Well, on the one hand, I've been sort of planning to learn JavaScript somewhat anyway, and so let me go ahead and try this. But then two, it also seemed like it would be a bit disingenuous to come and say this to you, oh, you should go do this thing, and but I didn't even do it. So let me give this a try and see how this goes. But I'd also point out, I'm doing this with JavaScript, but there are also other things you can do. So if you want to just improve your general Python skills, you can do this. I could use the same approach to say learn about the different parts of the Python standard library, or to go through the Python language reference, or to learn more about Git. There's a book called Pro Git that's available for free online. If you want to learn more about Git, you can do that. Or if you want to learn more about Docker or Kubernetes or Rust, everything can be rewritten in Rust. If you wanted to, there are multiple books on Rust. You can use this approach to make yourself a self-producing idol. And then that gives you an opportunity to build your own skills and have a little more career independence. So if you want to move along from the organization, if you don't think they're taking care of you, you've got these options. We're going to use the same approach, and I will probably use this approach to teach myself more about the code of some open source projects. So again, I play Pathfinder and Starfinder. I play it in person, but I also play it online. This is what's called a virtual tabletop that people use. The one that I prefer the most is one called Foundry VTT, and it's written in TypeScript. And so I think that's another thing I'm going to use to help teach myself TypeScript. So as I become more competent, TypeScript is just JavaScript with types. And so after becoming a competent JavaScript reader, I'm already using Foundry. I'll start looking at the code base, and there is a Foundry, so Foundry's open source, and there's a Pathfinder module for Foundry, and they're working on a Starfinder module for Foundry, and those are open source, and so I can work on making contributions to that and understanding that code base to help myself level up my TypeScript and JavaScript by using a tool that I'm already using for entertainment purposes, and I can learn from that. But you can apply this to almost any sort of technical topic, any sort of technical subject. But again, ask me about it next month, and we'll see if I've actually learned anything, or if I'm a terrible idol who doesn't get to debut. We'll see. So sort of the conclusion here. I've laid out what I think are some of the problems as far as how developers are hired and how software teams are built. I've laid out a potential solution. If you are someone who is in a position in your organization to implement some of those things, maybe give us a thought. But if you are not in a position to do that in your organization, but you think it might be useful for you yourself, it's something to give a try. So, and those are kind of the questions that I have for you all. Does this seem like just some Pollyanna nonsense, that I have said, or does it sort of seem vaguely feasible? Is it something that anyone would sort of think to try for themselves? Why or why not? And then the title, like I said, as I put the title together, I knew it sounded weirdly clickbaity, but it's just the reality is that's just kind of what my life has been. I'm a software developer. I'm using AI tools. I've listened to K-pop for 20 years. I've been demon hunting for the last 3 years. This is just what it is. This is just kind of where I am. And if you have sort of other questions for me, other than seeing me here, or hopefully some of you all come to PyTexas and or PyCon or DjangoCon. So if you see me in person, feel free to talk to me. But this is probably the social media that I use the most. I don't use as much social media as I used to, but this is probably where I'm most active. So if you have questions online for me, that is it. That's off my talk. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field them, or we can move on to other things. So.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for our speaker today?
Thank you for the talk. My question is a bit of a personal nature. What made you decide to switch from accounting
To software development.
to software development?
A lot of it was just sort of, there were a couple of things. One was, for me, personality-wise, I've always been more interested in looking forward than looking back. A lot of my accounting career was in what's called financial accounting. And so, you hear companies, release their earnings or blah, blah, blah. But that's all talking about stuff that's already happened, and you're not impacting anything going forward. And then a desire to build things was not a big part of me. And then I'm a nerd. I do nerd things. I've always been the computer person, and so I've always enjoyed that. So the idea of doing stuff in software has always been in my mind, but I just didn't major in computer science. So yeah, it seemed like it was a benefit for me. And then also, as I got older, the idea of, and this is all before the pandemic, I knew that as a software developer, it would be easier for me to be able to work remotely than as an accountant. Most of the accounting work I did also could have been done remotely, but companies didn't see it that way. So it was a combination of those things. So I think better lifestyle choices, and then also a better fit for my personal interests.
It's not really a question, but I liked the metaphor for using K-pop for training developers. It reminded me a lot of sports teams, right? In sports, you can't have, like in basketball, you can't have 5 Kobe Bryant's on the court at the same time. They're not going to pass the ball. No one's going to score. So you need to have role players and people that specialize in certain areas. And I feel like I've noticed that in my own career where in some areas I don't need to be the best. I just need to be good enough, right? So I can focus on other areas that maybe the team doesn't have that competency yet. So I like the metaphor.
My question is, as you talked about team, we hear that people talking if the team gets bigger, friction increases and time to take decisions increases. So what would be your take on that for having a smaller team versus a bigger team?
So a bigger team definitely requires more coordination, but I think that's sort of, I think, it's just sort of another problem that team has to address. And so, but again, let's see. When I talked about the different roles, one of the roles was in the different roles of K-pop groups. One of the roles was leader. One of the things that has happened, again, recently we have what I call these unit leaders. And I think that's been one of the solutions is, okay, well, let's see. So there's this group Stray Kids. It's an 8-member group. Stray Kids and 17. 17 is probably a better example. 17, a larger group, 13 members, but they're broken into sort of 3 teams. There's the vocal team, the performance team, and the rap team. Each of those teams has a leader. And so the vocal team leader focuses on making sure that the primary vocals are where they need to be, doing what they need to be, and helping the rest of the group with their vocals. And the same with the rap team, the same with the dance team. So the dance leader, makes sure that the dance team is on point, but also is supervising the choreography, that sort of thing. And so as the group gets bigger, you might have to designate some individual unit leaders. And then within that group 17, there's a 4th subgroup. So there's dance team, vocal team, performance team, and then the 4th team is the leaders team, which is made up of the 3 leaders. And they sort of communicate amongst themselves. So I think that's sort of the approach. It's just like software. You sort of take a problem, you decompose it, and then address it.
Other questions for our speaker? Well, if no one else has one, then I do. I'd like to ask you for another one of your spicy hot takes, if that's okay. So I did have something specific. So I didn't mean like off the cuff.
Okay.
I did have something specific in mind. So when you were talking about these K-pop teams, one of the things that you said is that sometimes there is someone who is hired just to look good.
Mm-hmm.
They put them in the middle, so when people take pictures, the pictures look nice. On a software development team, which role is that?
So that can vary a lot. It sort of depends on who the software is for and who it's intended. So I mean, so the obvious thing would be maybe the front end developer, but it could also be like the UI or UX developer, because the reality is, I had this conversation earlier today. Again, I'm a nerd. I do nerd stuff. There's a gaming convention coming up called OwlCon. Owl, because it's a gaming convention on the Rice campus, so it's called OwlCon. So people playing Pathfinder and probably BattleTech, in Warhammer, and these are all the nerd stuff. Their website is terrible. I was talking to a guy in Austin earlier today about trying to sign up for stuff, and he's like, yeah, the website was kind of confusing. I'm like, yeah, it's not a good website. And he's like, I was like, my quote was like, yes, the UI and UX on this website is not very good. And so so when you go to the OwlCon website, it's like the first thing you see is like, oh, like how do I find a thing? How do I even do what I'm supposed to do here? I want to buy a badge to attend this conference, this convention, but I can't figure out how to do it, or once I bought the badge, okay, I want to sign up to play a game, but how do I find the games I can sign up to play? That's hard to find. And so there are different ways that are there. So I would say, in web dev, maybe just the general sort of front end person, the sort of design person, but also UI UX, which is a subset of that, not just visual design, but the actual user interface, user experience. But then I would also say it could also be DevRel. Are people familiar with DevRel in general, developer relations? And so these are the people who sort of, now a DevRel person might be more of a visual lead as opposed to just a pure visual. In that line of visuals, there aren't a lot of people who are just one or the other. Oftentimes the visual will kind of become the visual lead, but sometimes the visual is selected for just their good looks. That is a thing that has happened. Some of the most, there are a few of the most popular idols who were they were cast while walking through a mall with their friends. Like somebody's like, oh, this person's good looking. Hey, do you want to join our company? But that would be my thinking. So the front end developers, really more front end designers than UI UX people, and then DevRel. I think those would be the people in those visual roles.
Do you think product owners, product managers will take that role?
I'm sorry.
Product owners or product managers, they're not exactly developers, but it just kind of, my brain just kind of went there. It's like they'll be.
So I would think that the product owners and the product managers, they might be more sort of visual lead / face of the group. And I think in software you have sort of different constituencies. So in K-pop, there's the general audience, like they're just sort of performing in front of the world, and you turn on your TV in Korea, or you watch a YouTube channel, you're here in the US, and you see these people. But if you're a product owner or a product manager, if it's an internal product, something's being used just by your team internally, then that person might be the visual lead or the face of the group for that product to be inside the company. But you also might have a DevRel who is the visual lead for that product outside of the company. And so, yeah, I think that could also be one as well. So again, a lot of my thinking has been shaped on, again, being personally trained in capitalism and having watched this industry grow and develop over the last 2 decades, and it has changed quite a bit. Somebody mentioned SNSD or /Girl Generation. That's what is. They're what they call sort of generations in K-pop. So that's one of the early second generation groups where they're really starting to sort of to figure out and fine tune the formula for, okay, how do we want this to go? How do we want to build this cultural technology? And we're now in the 5th generation, and you're starting to see more of the self-producing idols. So these ideas from second generation have been refined through the 3rd and through the 4th and into the 5th, and you're starting to see things change. Okay, and so this is just the madness that's in my head. This is just this is why you get titles like AI K-pop Demon Artist. This is just who I am, unfortunately. So this is what it is. So.
Excellent. Any last questions for our speaker?
Thank you for your time and attention and indulgence of my madness. So hopefully it was helpful.
Please join me in thanking our speaker.